Today we're reviewing the TCL QM7 on the bottom right-hand corner, the QM8 above it, and serving as reference the calibrated Bravia 9. So quick reminder, the Bravia 9 is calibrated, the QM8 is not calibrated, and the QM7 is not calibrated. The reason I have the Bravia 9 there is just to give you an idea of what a reference TV looks like compared to non-reference mini LEDs out of the box. Since the TCLs are unlikely to be calibrated by most users, I think comparing them to the calibrated top-notch B9 is a bit unfair. So let me tell you what calibration does. I think there's a misunderstanding. Tone mapping, that it is what it is. You cannot improve tone mapping with calibration, right? So when we saw those scenes where the Bravia 9 preserved color and all that stuff, didn't matter if it's calibrated or not. That's just the native tone mapping of all these TVs. Tone mapping is not something you can improve with calibration. Today's video is brought to you by WhoKeys. Trying to build a PC on a budget but don't know where to buy your Windows software cheaply? WhoKeys to the rescue. Use my coupon code SF20 and immediate discount with a free upgrade to Windows 11.
At the bottom of this order where it says code CARD, to the right is the product key you need to activate Windows. So copy this long number, then go to the Windows menu and click on Settings. In the Settings menu at the bottom, select Update and Security. Select Activation, then select Change Product Key, paste what you copied from WhoKeys, click Next, click Activate, and you're done.
You can buy Windows 11 Pro or Office 2019 Pro with my discount code SF20. Yes, I've been using WhoKeys for the last several years on my own PC builds and it just works. Now the calibration, what you do get is better color accuracy, right? Better white point, maybe color saturation is a bit better. So I try not to comment too much on that beyond, oh, calibration gives you slightly different color. Now, out of the box, how close does the QM7 get to a calibrated Bravia 9? And the QM7 came close more often than not, as long as the content was under 2,000 or under 1,500 nits. Above 2,000 nits is where the QM7 had challenges. So the Bravia 9 did it. I mean, it nailed it. 1,000 nits, 1,500 nits, 4,000 nits, right? That's why it's serving as a reference. Both of these TVs are set to their most accurate mode, and we'll go to the settings right now real quick. Firmware updates, all three TVs updated to the most current firmware as of today, end of August 2024. Okay, it's in professional mode. Remember, it's calibrated, so this is, for me, the best and most accurate. I've compared it to the reference monitor, and this is as good as it gets, I think. So brightness is on max, right? We're watching HDR, not SDR, so it's on max. Gradation preferred is the best in my opinion, and everything else is normally what I use. Auto local dimming, I have it on medium. This gives me maximum specular highlights. I really like how this looks. And peak luminance is on high. Color, because it's calibrated, it's on Expert 1. All right, that is the Sony. So let's compare the TCL QM7 on the bottom. QM8, make sure the settings are very similar. Again, both firmware are updated. So let's go to the pictures real quick. All right, they're both in movie mode, right? This is the mode we use for HDR accurate settings. Of course, it can get better in the different modes that you have, but we'll just use movie mode for now. Brightness settings, both are maximum 100, contrast 100. This is mostly default out of the box, right? The only real change I made sure is local contrast on high and gamma at 2.6 because we are in a dark room. Okay, let's see anything else. Color, very similar. Color saturation 50, this is still default. Color temperature warm, -5. This gets you the most accurate color temperature again. Neither of these TVs are calibrated. All right, and clarity, the basics, out of the box, nothing crazy. Okay, so 2,000 nit content. I'm gonna adjust my exposure as I see things. But so in this content right here, and Jennifer Gala again, thank you so much for providing this content. Check out her channel. This is the HDR Super channel I'm using. She has 2 channels. I'll pause right here. I think it's a great scene right here. Already, slight differences. Okay, so, and let me adjust the exposure real quick. I'm lowering the exposure just a bit so you guys can see right here. This is the subtle difference right here. So these are very fine cloud patterns highlighted very clearly. And on the QM7, it's just a step behind, right? The clarity isn't there, probably because the dimming zones, there are less of them. The Bravia 9 and the QM8 really match each other very well. And the QM7 is just a step behind, right? The clarity is not there. But again, side by side, you'll notice it. I think if you walked into a room, one to the next, you may not, but I had to call that out. Right now, though, for sure, I'm definitely impressed by the QM7 in terms of its overall look and feel. So I'm gonna stop right here, only because I wanna show you the colors real quick. So I'm gonna turn up the exposure. All right, let's look at that. Okay, so remember the Bravia 9 is calibrated. The QM8 and the QM7 are not. They're just in movie mode, and this looks phenomenal. This is just basic HDR, right? No Dolby Vision. And I'm seeing the rich orange is the slight, so the slight differences really is in that orange. Very subtle, very slight. And if I lower the exposure a bit so you can see more of that, maybe a little overexposed, so you see more of that color. If I lower the exposure, you see the sunset or sunrise. The 9 and the 8 slightly brighter than the 7, but the color is there, right? It's not doing anything wrong. So where is the money going? They have made the right decision by including less dimming zones. It can't get us bright, right? And the mini LEDs are not as bright as the QM8 or the Bravia 9, but overall, the image quality is phenomenal in terms of color accuracy, color saturation. I mean, you can argue that the QM7 maybe is a little bit brightened. The QM8 needs better tone mapping, says Next Gen Tech. It's $9.99. I'm not going to argue with you. It could stand to do better tone mapping, but it's also focused on black levels more than perfect tone mapping. So I'm not going to say you're wrong, right? But it is what it is. For $9.99, its tone mapping is fine. This content, this first video we're doing, goes between 1,000 and 2,000 nits, right? 3,000 nits. So there's a range of brightness. So that way you can see the QM7 shine in content where it doesn't have to be as bright, looks nearly indistinguishable. And where it does have to be as bright, that's when you see the differences like we saw in the opening scene. Oh, I'm gonna pause here so I can make a quick exposure adjustment for you guys. I'm looking at the black levels on the QM7 and it looks pretty good. There are no complaints here. Now, it's not a perfect TV. We will get to scenes where you'll say, oh, okay, that's where the money is going. If you're paying a little bit more, you're gonna see those differences. So you see the blacks are a touch more lifted on the QM7 compared to the Bravia 9, and even the QM8 is a touch more lifted right here. So this is kind of like the QM7 not having enough dimming zones to demonstrate this brightness without lifting some of that black. These are the limitations that you get on a budget TV, but would you have noticed this if I didn't overexpose it just a little bit to show you the differences, right? Now, even without overexposing, I can see the differences in my eye, so it's that evident. The QM8 is actually closer to the Bravia 9, but the Bravia 9 does have better blooming control in this scene. Yeah, you really see the lifted blacks in these scenes with the QM7. The QM7 slightly lifted where his pants are, the Bravia 9 and the QM8 looking pretty good right here. And side by side, you notice this difference, but if I turn it down to an exposure that you guys are gonna normally see with normal eyesight, see very subtle differences. Not terrible, right? That is kind of what I see. The corner, so I see both the QM7 and the QM8 in the corner slightly lifted. The Bravia 9 uniformity nails it in that right-hand corner where his knee is, right, his left knee. So this is where you're paying the big bucks on the Bravia 9. There's a certain consistency in the shadow detail, whereas the 8 gets very close and the 7 is just a bit farther behind. This is kind of like a pseudo-uniformity test. So if you watch these kind of scenes where it's important to have black uniformity, right? I'm going to turn up the exposure so you guys can see what I'm talking about. And I think there's some processing here, maybe even a dirty screen effect. Ooh, what is that? So I'm seeing patterns here. Now, by overexposing, it's actually more visible than it is, but you can see that The Bravia 9 cleans up this image quite well. Technically, I believe that those things in the background is probably in the image, right? If Jennifer is here, tell me, Jennifer, are those, is that dirty screen or is that in the image? Because the fact that I think it's in the image because I see some of it in the Bravia 9. So I'm going to pause then. So this is not a dirty screen. This is processing. The Bravia 9 cleaned up the background, says, you know what, you guys don't want to see this. Or is that shadow detail? So you guys tell me. Increasing the exposure in this scene, you can see how fewer dimming zones and inferior image processing on the QM7 makes it harder to fine-tune the black crushing around the bright white uniforms. This was less of an issue at 1000 nits, but at 2000 nits and brighter, it's a problem that the QM8 appears to be dealing with better, thanks to more dimming zones, but even then, not as clean as the Bravia 9 with superior image processing. The Bravia 9 XR Clear thinks that this background is saying, you know what, that's junk. I'm going to clean that up. Up to debate, right? Should we be seeing this? If we are saying the Bravia 9 is fully calibrated and accurate, then maybe that black level should be a bit deeper and you don't see it at all. Whereas on the 8, it's not as deep, you still see some of it, and the 7 cannot get black enough. And you see it in that halo, right? It should be as black as that halo. Why isn't the rest of the scene that black? So these are the limitations of dimming zone, possibly processing limitations of the QM7. Slight brightness difference between the Bravia 9 and the QM8. Bravia 9 is just a touch brighter in the scene, but the QM7 is very close. All three of them preserve color quite well, and not bad, I have to say. This is pretty good. QM7, good job. So there's a lot of cloud detail on this side, whereas the QM7 clips a lot of the detail here because there's not enough dimming zones. I mean, if you sit close, you still see a little bit, but the QM8 has some, the Bravia 9 has the most. And this is the tone mapping that people talk about. I want to make sure. Yeah, I think you guys can see that. Oh my goodness. Is there a spot on my camera? That's a spot on it. I'm gonna dust that camera. Okay, let's move on. But again, there's a reason why you're paying a little less, right? These are not scenes that are even on any TV show. This is Jennifer Gala flexing her super bright scenes for awesome TVs to show off, right? This is the scenes that would compare the G4, Bravia 9, S95D. And the QM7, for the most part, the rest of the scene, it looks fine. It's just the super bright parts of the scene at 4000 nits. Here we go, 4000 nit sunset scene. And look at that. Like, which TV is which? The QM7 is doing such a great job with the black levels, and I'll show you how good it is. So you got this super bright scene, right? Now, if I increase the exposure so you can see the black level detail, look at that. The black levels are phenomenal. The QM7 blacks nearly identical to the other two TVs, right? The colors are there. I mean, it's wow. Big wow. QM7 right here. Is it me or does the QM8 have pretty good uniformity? Let me turn up the exposure a bit more just to check out uniformity in this scene. Pop up the exposure. Yeah, you know, QM7, for a $700 TV, that uniformity is pretty good. Or the lack of dimming zones on the QM7 on the bottom of the pool right there. At the bottom of the pool, you can see that's where the subtlety comes in. So the lack of dimming zones in this scene, you can catch it. Look beneath the swimmer, right? There's a lot of subtle light happening down there. And the QM7, because it overbrightens it a bit, you're losing some of that detail. And the Bravia 9 has tone mapped it down to match the consistency. So it feels like the QM8 and the QM7 may have overbrightened that part of the scene, losing a bit of detail by doing that. I'll turn down the exposure a bit more so you guys can see that. The stars on both the TCLs are a little bit brighter than on the Bravia 9. You guys notice that? Because Bravia 9 wants to give you uniform black levels, but if you guys want brighter stars, the QM7 and the QM8 does it. However, that is a compromise on the shadow detail. Notice on the edge of the screen, right here, right? QM7, QM8 and Bravia 9. The Bravia 9 has the deepest blacks, however, its specular highlights arguably aren't as bright, but then it keeps its black levels more consistent. The QM7 looks almost as bright, if not as bright as the QM8, but because it has less dimming zones, you can see the blacks are a bit lifted, but it's very subtle. So this is why you're paying the additional money. To process it like this, where you have the deeper blacks with some good specular highlights, it costs money, some processing, and thus $3,000. The QM7, hey, $700. This is close enough and good enough for most people. So Netflix and Disney viewing only. You say QM7 because it will be indistinguishable to the QM8 at that level. That is all going to be used for. That is all it's going to be used for. Yes, Rob. If you watch Netflix, Disney, Peacock, any other streaming services, this is how it's going to look. I'm going to pause right here. This content, Jennifer's content last, it's not super bright, right? This is how most movies and streaming content is graded, not super bright so that most TVs can look good. And the QM7 represents the best of most TVs. The QM8 is extraordinarily good in terms of tone mapping for that budget. And the Bravia 9 is the flagship. So taking down the exposure so you can see the dark shadow detail, specular highlights, tone mapping, right, in the clouds, all the details are there. Then you go to the shadow detail to see if it's all there. Look at the darkest parts of the scene. Look at that black level. I mean, it's all there, very similar to the QM8 and the Bravia 9. So yes, Rob, if all you're watching is Netflix and Disney, I cannot in good conscience tell you to get paid $300 more for the QM8 if that's all you have, right? All right. Okay. Thank you for showing up, everyone. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to wrap this up in 3 words. QM7, highly recommended. If you could afford a little bit more, though, I also recommend the QM8. I see the differences, but if it's just Netflix, streaming basic stuff, streaming Disney Plus, Paramount, Peacock, Hulu, whatever, right? Just streaming stuff, and it's an external streamer for sure. The QM7 looks just like the QM8 or the Bravia 9. But if you're talking Kaleidoscape, high quality discs, that may be a different matter because I think on stream, and only because those other content sources may go a lot brighter. But most streaming content is under 1,000 nits. QM7 nailed its design objective, which is look great for $700, anything that's normal content like Netflix and the like. The QM7 does it. It fulfilled its obligation. So if you have any questions, go ahead, put it in the comments below. Until next time, my friends, stop the FOMO.